Hey everyone, good afternoon. This is Greg. It's Thursday afternoon. It's a pretty cool, although we had a little sun in Oregon today. Finally, this time of year it gets pretty rough. Everybody's anxious to see the sun. But it's been a good day. I got on my bike a little bit. It is spring break, but I'm pretty busy. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the design assignment. So let's just talk about design for a minute. First of all, quantitative design is a huge field. And this is what experimental psychologists do and this kind of thing. But if you're going to write a quantitative dissertation, you're going to be limited to some very basic designs. And you can look at all of the quantitative dissertations you can find, and they all stick to some pretty standard formats. So I've spent a lot of time. Design means, how do you analyze something quantitatively? Do you use a two-way ANOVA? How do you set up your control in your experimental groups? But if you're planning on a quantitative dissertation, you're trying to show something with mathematics, essentially. But in the educational realm, there's a few certain key pieces. So you're not even really close to thinking about how a major quantitative dissertation would work. And if you go that route, which I hope you do, it's a pretty exciting process. But there's a lot more design and statistics you have to learn. So we're just scratching the surface here. We're just beginning the process. And if you have an idea for what you might want to research, that's interesting. So I want to be clear on what I expect on the design assignment. Now, up to this point, everybody's been thinking about variables that they want to measure. And let me take, I believe it's Alpert, who's thinking about, what's the program that helps students in community colleges, Step Ahead, or I can't remember the name. I don't deal with community colleges that much. But anyway, I'm somewhat familiar with what he's doing. So there's only about two designs that we're really going to focus on at this time, and that's generally a comparative design or a correlational design. Now, let me explain to you what I mean by a comparative design. Let's say you're interested in the graduation rates at community colleges, the differences between men and women who have taken the Pathway Project. So I would like you to specifically specify, these are my variables, the rates of passing after the Pathways Project is completed of men and women. And then I am going to compare them to see if there's a difference in the passing rates between the two groups. Or I'm going to compare students who have taken the Pathways program and those who have not, and see if there's a difference in the proportion of students who have graduated. So you're comparing two groups, and you're comparing a proportion between two groups to explore your phenomenon. Or you could be concerned about mean. You could be comparing the mean 8th grade test scores of men and women in Oregon, or the mean 8th grade test scores of all 8th graders in Oregon or Utah, but just be very specific about what variables you're using and how you're going to compare them. That's kind of a basic comparative design, and there's all kinds of different types of comparative design. There's quasi-comparative, there's experimental. There's not too many experiments done in education because we can't manipulate the independent variable. We can't ethically take a group of 8th graders and have one of them the control group and the other exposed to a teacher who has a certain type of teaching methodology and see if there's a difference in their performance. So we don't have too much experimental design in education. That limits us to basically comparative, where we're looking for differences between rates or proportions among groups. And then there's correlational. And some people, it wasn't your fault, but the book's a little unclear on this. in correlation research, you can only correlate continuous variables. So you can correlate GPA with height, height with shoe size. You can correlate income with GPA, any continuous variable. So the null hypothesis in a correlational design is that there is no correlation between two variables, height and GPA. There is no correlation. There's no linear relationship. There's really not a directional null hypothesis in correlation. Either something correlates or it does not. Now, it can be positively correlated as IQ goes up, GPA goes up, or as IQ goes up, the number of hours studied per night goes down. That would be a negative correlation, but that doesn't mean directional. It doesn't make sense to say there's a directional correlation. So, if you're doing something that's going to involve correlation, and you developed last week a survey where you operationalized a variable, and so you're going to measure motivation or job satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5. Well, you could correlate that with number of years that the teacher has been teaching. So you could come up with a correlation coefficient. So if you're going to correlate two continuous variables, I want you to be very specific about what variables you are going to correlate. And that's all we're looking for in this assignment. This is just the very beginning of quantitative design. So that's all I would like you to do, is specify for me exactly what variables you're using. Are you going to compare different means among groups? Are you going to compare different proportions among groups? Or are you going to look at correlation between two variables? That's basically all we do up to this point in educational research. And it gets more elaborate than that, but as you go into the quantitative field, the designs get more complicated. So I just want to see very specifically what you're going to do with your variables. Now, as we go into next week, you have to have your SPSS working. And I had somebody at Concordia help me install that. And it's a challenge, but it's part of the course. It has to work, because we will use that to find descriptive statistics, correlations, two-sample t-tests, one-way ANOVA, so it really has to work well. That's the big job. So when you submit the design assignment, just be very specific about what variables you're going to compare or what variables you're going to try and correlate. And I'll be satisfied with that, because this is just the beginning of the quantitative approach. So I hope everyone's having a good week. If you have any questions before you submit it, which it isn't due till Sunday, I'd like to get them a little earlier, but I want you to take some time on this. The group assignment is due Saturday. So anything I can help you with, please let me know. And the big thing is, let's make sure we have SPSS ready to go for next week. So everyone have a good afternoon, and I hope you have a good weekend. Okay, thank you. Bye.